Today, we're very happy to have Hsiao-wen Cheng as our speaker. Hsiao-wen came to us most recently from a postdoctoral fellowship in the Institute of History and Philology at the Academia Sinica. She received her BA and MA degrees in Chinese literature from the National Taiwan University, and her PhD in history from the University of Washington in 2012. I'm not going to take a lot of time to tell you about her work, which is absolutely fascinating. But I will mention, as I think you will soon see, that she is enthusiastic about exploring the usefulness and necessity of queer methodology to studying Chinese history, and vice versa. And it's really great to have her bringing Chinese history into a robust discussion of sexuality. This year, in the Women's Studies and Religion program, she is working on a book project based on her dissertation, Traveling Stories and Untold Desires, Female Sexuality in Song, China. And she will speak to us today about medicine, exorcism, and female sexualities. Hsiao-wen.
Well, thank you, Anne, for your introduction, and thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And thank you, Tracy, so much. The amazing poster was Tracy's idea. So the topic that I'm going to talk about today is called medicine, exorcism, and female sexualities in medieval China. I'll start with this person, Cheng. He was a specialist in Fuke, or women's medicine, from the southern zone. Oh, and I have handouts over that corner of the table, so please help yourself. Cheng Ziming came from a family with 3-generation history of medical practice. While serving as a medical instructor in Jiankang Prefecture, today's Nanjing, he compiled a book called 妇人大全良方, or All-Inclusive Good Prescriptions for Women. As the title of the book suggests, it is a compilation of all available medical prescriptions for women with corresponding symptoms up to that time. It is an all-inclusive gynecological handbook. Now, this is a page from this book, and it is pretty typical a structure of many Song medical books, especially those on prescriptions. You have, it is organized by categories of illnesses, and it has a short paragraph on pathology under each category, and has usually a long list or a short list of prescriptions, recipes, and sometimes it comes with case records. Cheng Ziming's book is originally prefaced in 1237. The earliest copy of this book we have is a Yuan Dynasty 14th century copy, which is exactly this page is what you see here. And one section of this book is titled On the Prescriptions for 寡妇 Cold and Heat Like Intermittent Fevers, 寡妇寒热如疟方论. It starts with a pathological paragraph on the disorders of 寡妇, which means women without husbands. For those of you who know Chinese, 寡妇 here doesn't simply mean widows. We'll get to that later. And you have the Chinese transcription and English translation on your handouts. And during this talk, if you see a little number here in front of the sources that I put on the slides, you can find them on your handouts too. Just follow the number. And this paragraph is actually an elaboration of This paragraph is an elaboration of a very similar passage written by this person called Hsiao-wen about a century ago on his section titled Maidens, Menses, and Blockage, 仕女月后不同. Cheng Ziming also quotes Hsiao-wen for his recipe and case record of treating a nun. But different from Hsiao-wen, Cheng Ziming here, he is consciously attempting to construct his own theory, something that's quite unusual in some medical books. Now, in addition to this person, Hsiao-wen, Chen Ziming also incorporates several other sources into this paragraph. So this is a very interesting synthesis of many earlier texts. Just to give you a sense that I mark the different sources in different colors. So in addition to Hsiao-wen, which I highlight in yellow, Chen Ziming also quotes two Confucian classics, Mencius and Book of Changes, actually 易经系辞传. And one Chun Yu's biography, it's a case record from 2nd century BCE, and another doctor called Cheng from the 5th century. Many Song Dynasty medical books, especially the state-sponsored compilations, took an all-inclusive and pragmatic approach, aimed at including as many extant prescriptions as possible and made them easy to use for even non-specialist readers. Now, this book of Chen Ziming's was not directly commissioned by the court, but the author worked as an official medical scholar for the local government. And that is why he was capable of incorporating, having access to that many sources. It is common that we see in some medical books that people quoting earlier texts with or without citing their references. But it is rather rare that we see medical authors making conscious claims that this is my theory, this is new. Nobody has ever talked about this but me. And this is what we see in this paragraph of Chen Ziming's. Today I will start with a close analysis of this passage, what after all is new in Chen Ziming's pathology. I will examine the original context of the sources that he draws, compare that with what other Song medical books say about the similar issue. I will trace how discussions on women's heterosexual inactivity had changed in Chinese medical texts, including the so-called bedchamber works. In the latter half of the presentation, I will use the case of women's dreaming of intercourse with ghosts, 梦与鬼交, and compare how female sexuality was imagined and constructed in multiple different and often contradicting ways in several coexisting traditions. I will argue that there were conscious attempts to pathologize women's sexual bodies beyond men's control, to normalize women's heterosexual desire. So, there was not simply a marriage imperative for women in pre-modern China, as Deborah Sen suggests. But such attempts were rare, heterogeneous, and self-inconsistent. Gender discourse is more complicated and incoherent than what is presented in many current studies on gender and Chinese medicine. 医术里的性别论述是很庞杂，常常自相矛盾的。Female sexuality as the subject of my study is an unstable category that facilitates a hermeneutic circle, a constant dialogue between me and my sources. Now let's come back to Chen Ziming's paragraph. It says, on the illnesses of Guafu, there hasn't been any discussion since antiquity, except that the biography of Chun Yu-yi, an imperial doctor from 2nd century BCE, and Cheng have briefly touched upon. Well, we know that he lied, right? Half of this passage is kind of plagiarized from Hsiao-wen. But then here you see this conscious attempt to constructing something new. And he's going to give a definition of guafu. He said, by gua, it means what Mencius states, those without a husband are gua, such as nuns and widows, single in without yang. They yu men and yet cannot have one, or they want, need men and yet cannot have one. This phrase is a direct quote from Cheng Yu-yi's biography, and the verb, as I highlight here, yu, is a key word. And we will see another usage of the word yu very soon, and we will talk about that later. And let's come back to this quote. It says, therefore, such women gradually become sick. The Book of Changes, which is a Confucian classic, says, as the energy of heaven and earth mingle, all creatures become crystallized into living beings. As the essence of male and female meet, all creatures generate. Soul young, single in, how can it work? For those who live in women's quarters, their 欲性 or thoughts of desire germinate but leads nowhere. Thoughts of desire is my translation of the compound 欲性. The 欲 here is, for those of you who read Chinese, you can see that this word is a variant of the same word 欲 with a heart radical. We first see this phrase 欲心萌而不遂 in the book of Hsiao-wen. We'll get to that later too. Now let's still come back to this quote. Therefore, such women, their thoughts of desire germinate but leads nowhere, therefore resulting in the imbalance of yin and yang, sudden cold and sudden heat. And the following long list of symptoms, almost anything you can think of, these all are the illnesses of 寡妇. And it says, in their post-manifestation, the pulse of the liver, which with a capital L is not literally the organ liver. Just a quick note on Chinese medicine, the human body is conceptualized as functioned by several interconnected systems and subsystems. Each system has a leading organ, such as the liver. When translated into English, it is capitalized to distinguish from the anatomical liver. So liver with a capital L is in charge of the circulation of blood with a capital B. And blood is a crucial functional system for both men's and women's bodies, but was particularly considered the leading factor for women's bodies during the song. So the pulse of the liver of such women appears string-like over the upper wrist and in between the thumb and the wrist. The causes of such kind of pulse are all illnesses due to ample blood, 血盛. And last two sentences, the classic says, when a man's essence, or jing, is ample, he thinks of a mate. When a woman's blood is ample, she is ready to conceive children. Well, actually, I cannot find this sentence in any medical classic. Those of you who work on Chinese medicine, if you know, can tell me. But the earliest appearance that I can trace is again from this Hsiao-wen. But Hsiao-wen didn't say that it was a quote from a classic. So it is either possible that there was actually this classic but now lost, or it is also possible that Chen Ziming again stole this sentence from Hsiao-wen and then attributed it to some classic origin. The last sentence, one may comprehend most of the principles by observing the essence and the qi. This is a direct quote from Cheng of this 5th century. Now, there are several things I want to point out from this passage. First of all is Chen Ziming's construction of a new medical category. The term 寡妇, as we know in both classical and modern Chinese, simply means widow. But here, Chen Ziming is given this old term a new meaning. He expands it to include all husbandless women, or more precisely, all women without sexual contact with men. And he didn't do it by accident. He did it intentionally by carefully editing the words. We see he first explained the definition of 寡妇by quoting Mencius, but he only quoted half of Mencius' original sentence. Original sentence in Mencius was those who are old and without a husband are 寡. And that's one of this 鳏寡孤独 category, which are, old without husband are 寡, and old without a wife are other things, and they're old without sons are the other, and they're all those people who need special social welfare. But here, Chen Ziming also quotes half of the sentence. So you don't need to be old and you're just without a husband and you're 寡. And also, he altered Hsiao-wen's original phrase, 失尼寡妇, nuns and widows, into, well, it also means nuns and widows, but he's using a different Chinese expression for widow, because by 寡妇, he meant something different from Hsiao-wen and basically anybody else. So Chen Ziming creates a new medical category for all women who lack sexual contact with men by giving a new definition to the old word 寡妇. well, we know nobody buys his linguistic invention, but his medical category remains. And the second thing is the two kinds of yu, as in the two phrases that are underlined. The first is a direct quote from Cheng Yuyi's medical case record. In its original context, it is in fact really vague what yu actually means. Yu, as we know in classical Chinese, used as a verb, is used not only to mean desire, but also intention, necessity, tendency, and the future tense. So you often see in medical books when it says patients with such and such symptoms, 预死, that means they are about to die. No, they are bound to die. It doesn't mean they want to die. So it is, and in its original context from Cheng Yuyi's case record, Cheng Yuyi treats a king's maidservant who has backache and intermittent fever. And Cheng Yuyi diagnoses the woman's problem as menses blockage. And the cause is that the maidservant 遇男子而不可得. Well, it is unclear whether this phrase 遇男子而不可得 means that the woman's sexual desires men, or that her mature body as manifested by menstruation is ready for her to have intercourse with men and to reproduce. We'll get to more details later. Now the second 语 used in the compound 语心 as an adjectival in Chen Zimin's context means rather unambiguously sexual desire or sexual desire toward men. The third point I want to make is that such a medical awareness of women's sexual desire might have some hidden connection with the bedchamber tradition, which is a tradition that was part of general medicine, but before the Song. But then during the Song, it was intentionally excluded by Song doctors. The bedchamber works, or we call fangzhong, generally speaking, they were written for aristocratic men on the principles and techniques of sexual intercourse in order to nourish their bodies and even to reach immortality. Bedchamber arts have been quite marginalized since Tang Dynasty. In Tang, this is one of the Tang Dynasty medical books by Sun Simiao, Prescriptions Worth 1,000. In this book, all the bedchamber literature was kind of condensed into only one single chapter that's titled Nourishment in the Bedchamber. And that even that was completely excluded in most Song medical books. But Song medical books draw extensively from Sun Simiao's other chapters, so that was a conscious exclusion. However, on the issue of female sexuality and sexual desire, I see a possible connection here between Song medical books and bedchamber tradition. We will get to that later too. And the final point I want to make with this passage is that by quoting the two Confucian classics, by quoting the Book of Changes on the way heaven and earth generate living beings, Chen Zimin theorizes the necessity of heterosexual intercourse for women from the laws of reproduction, and which is based on a Confucian cosmogony. This contrived link between reproductive impulse and women's sexual desire, I would argue, is new in Song medicine, although this link is not really very well explained by Chen Zimin. Now let's go back to the original context of the two references that Chen Zimin makes of pre-Song medicine. The first one is Cheng Yuyi. In this case record, Cheng Yuyi treats the maidservant who serves the king and is supposed to be celibate. She has pain on her back and loins and intermittent fever. Several other doctors also have come and made diagnosis, but only Cheng Yuyi correctly detects that she has menses blockage, and that's the cause of her other symptoms. And the cause of her menses blockage is 遇男子而不可得. Cheng Cheng uses herbal steam or smoke to cure this woman's menses blockage, and he explains that he detects her menses blockage by taking her kidney pulse, and her 遇难子而不可得 by taking her liver pulse. We know that liver is in charge of the blood. That's pretty much all we know. Cheng Yu-yi here, he doesn't make any further comments on the connection or the pathology. However, Chen Ziming's second reference, Chu Cheng, from the 5th century, makes it clear that what matters is not sexual desire, but a physiology of women's and men's reproductive bodies. The sentence that Chen Ziming took from Chu Cheng's book is in the section titled Essence and Blood, 精血. The whole passage is such. He says, once a woman's menstruation begins, it will be imbalanced if she does not have intercourse with men for more than 10 years. It will also be imbalanced if she thinks of intercourse with men within less than 10 years. Such it's a tricky time window, right? Such an imbalance will prevent the old blood from being discharged and cause the new blood to circulate irregularly. The blood may either permeate into bones or transform into tumors. Under such circumstances, even if she has intercourse with men, it would be hard for her to produce children. Having intercourse with men too much dries up the fluid and exhausts the woman's body. Giving birth to too many children and breastfeeding them dries up the blood and kills the woman. One may comprehend most of the principles by observing the essence and the blood. The last sentence we saw is quoted by both Hsiao-wen and Chen Ziming. Now, although Chu Cheng says that one of the problems is when women think of men too early, in Chinese it's as 思, what it really describes is a physiology of women's reproductive body, the right timing for women to conceive and to reproduce, the right and wrong circulations of the blood, and the physical problems emerging from a female body that is ready to conceive but is deferred or hastened. We can also see that although Chu Cheng's focus is women's reproductive bodies, he doesn't simply take women as childbirth machines. He also warns that for women's health, they shouldn't have sex with men too much or giving birth to too many children. Now, this passage immediately actually follows a parallel passage on men, which describes the irregular circulation of essence if men have sex with women before maturity or after aging. In another passage from the section titled Asking for Progeny, Chu Cheng repeats the point that in order to successfully produce children, men and women have to consummate their marriage at proper ages. He says, nowadays, women have sexual intercourse with men as early as their menstruation begins. Their yin energy is damaged before fully developed. Therefore, they do not conceive after intercourse, fail to give birth even if pregnant, and even if they give birth, their children are weak and short-lived. After this passage, he records that when the king seeks his advice on how to have sons, he gives the king two advices. First, never to take consorts below the age 20, and second, to look for women who already have several sons, which means to get somebody else's wives. And so as we can see from the two sources, Cheng Yu-yi treats the maid servant's menstrual blockage without explaining this woman Yu man in what sense. Chu Cheng's concern is the right age for men and women to have intercourse so that they can keep their reproductive bodies functioning and produce healthy kids. He also doesn't comment on sexual desire. Hsiao-wen Chen, in her article Between Passion and Repression, refers to both Cheng Yu-yi and Chu Cheng's cases as ones that treat women's so-called sexual frustration. But as we have seen, what the text really describes is simply women without sexual contact with men, or in the wrong timing. We never know whether or not these women were sexually frustrated. That was not the doctor's concern either. What the text really talk about is women's heterosexual inactivity, not sexual frustration. 没有男人和欲求不满是两回事。 To equalize the two things is not simply harmful to contemporary women, especially queer women, but also misleading in reading historical texts. Having said that, as you can probably notice, I am also making distinctions that were probably not there in the past. When making distinctions between women's sexual and reproductive bodies, between sexual desire and reproductive physiology, I am also creating categories that either Cheng or Cheng was probably not aware of. But these categories, I believe, are useful in reminding us not to take for granted that Cheng Yu, Cheng, Chen Ziming, and Shui were all talking about the same thing, as if that thing is a monolithic natural existence, which Chen Ziming would probably call it illnesses of guafu. Now, pre-song sources that do talk about sexual desire extensively and the problem of really sexual frustration are the bedchamber works. The bedchamber works teach aristocratic men how to nourish their bodies and to reach immortality through sexual intercourse. And the key is to keep their own bodies under control and also their female partners during the intercourse. The bedchamber literature approaches sexual desire and female sexuality in a very different context from the kind of medicine that Song doctors acknowledged. One example is Tao Hongjing's chapter titled Damages and Benefits of Sexual Domination Over Women, 玉女损益, in his book titled Record on Nourishing and Prolonging Life. You have several excerpts on your handout, and I won't go into details, but I want to make a few points here. First of all, although it occasionally says women must have men as a parallel sentence to men must have women, as you can see in passage A, what it really discusses is men. It is about sexual desire, but it is only about men's sexual desire. The central idea is to keep as much jing as you can, because jing, or essence, as manifested by semen, is regarded the essence of a man's life, as you can see in passage B. And the highest ideal is not to have sexual desire at all. Well, of course, not by surpassing it, but by transcending it or by releasing it somewhat sometime. As what I underlined in passage C, it says it would be the best if one truly has no sexual thoughts. And in passage D, supreme men separate beds, mediocre men use a different blanket. Sleeping alone is more beneficial than taking 1,000 doses of medicine. So men must have women except the supreme ones. Most men, unfortunately, are mediocre, and they must have women because they will lose much more jing otherwise. By intercourse with ghosts, perhaps. So the problem is not excessive or deviant or unfulfilled sexual desire, but precisely sexual desire itself. The concern is not about having or not having sex, but about keeping or losing jing, about whether or not you can keep your own body under control. So bedchamber authors also often teach men to hold from ejaculating when having intercourse. Extant bedchamber works from about the 7th century began to graphically imagine and pathologize women's unfulfilled sexual desire for men. One example is Secrets from the Jade Chamber. It describes the cause of women's intercourse with ghosts. So it's a dialogue between Cai Nu and Peng Zu. They are both legendary figures who are believed to have reached immortality. And Cai Nu is a woman, Peng Zu is a man. So Cai Nu asks, what is the cause of intercourse with ghosts? Peng Zu responds, due to the lack of intercourse between yin and the yang, the woman's desire becomes intense, and so ghosts assume human forms and have intercourse with her. Here we really see an explicit link between women's heterosexual inactivity and their sexual frustration. But it does not talk about reproduction at all. And if we continue to read Pengzu's comment, it kind of betrays its real concerns. It says, the way of ghostly intercourse surpasses that of humans. The woman will gradually become enchanted, but she will keep it a secret and not let others know, and enjoy it on her own. And she may eventually die without anyone knowing why. What we see previously in Tao Hongjing's book, Tao Hongjing also talks about the damage of men's intercourse with ghosts, and that's the loss of semen 100 times worse than usual. Here, Secrets of the Jade Chamber, it simply says that women's comparable problem causes death without really explaining the pathology, as though the real danger is that women find better forms of sex or alternatives to sex with men and simply enjoy it on their own. The real concern here is not about fulfilling women's desire and perhaps less about caring for their health, but rather about preventing women's sexual bodies from going beyond men's control. Now let's summarize a little bit. When speaking of women's problems caused by lack of sexual contact with men, Cheng Yi was quite ambiguous, both pathologically and semantically. Chu Cheng's concern was more to construct a physiology of the reproductive body than to analyze women's sexual desire. Only bedchamber authors talked about sexual desire per se, but not in the context of reproduction. And what they really concerned was the bodies beyond man's control. Bedchamber authors' anxiety, however, betrays their awareness of the fact that women may pursue sexual pleasure without men. Medical doctors and bedchamber authors approach female sexuality in different ways under different logic. Xu Shuwei and Chen Ziming claimed that they inherited only from Chun Yuyi and Chu Cheng, and then they never mentioned a word about these people. But they added the concern for women's sexual desire to the pathology of women's heterosexual inactivity and combined women's sexual frustration with reproductive physiology. Chen Ziming further naturalized it by constructing a link between sexual desire and a Confucian cosmogony. But if we really think about it, Chen Ziming's theory really is a threat to Confucian family ethics. Let's think about if women without husband are naturally more susceptible to all this long list of illnesses of guafu, as Chen Ziming described, then should widows remarry or not? Or should they just keep taking drugs and, and they'll be fine? So now, I'm going to use the rest of the presentation discussing the case of women's intercourse with ghosts, or Yu Gui Jiao. Well, ghosts is a convenient translation for me to translate the Chinese gui. Gui in Chinese tradition can refer to really a lot of things, the spirits of dead people, demonic entities, or even lesser gods. Medicine, especially prescriptional medicine and bedchamber arts and Taoist exorcism, especially the thunder rites, all have different treatments for intercourse with ghosts. I want to use this comparison to further illustrate how female sexuality was imagined and constructed in multiple different ways. And we will also see another example of the heterogeneity of some medical books as well. The passage that we just saw from Secrets of the Jade Chamber, it attributes women's intercourse with ghosts to intense sexual desire due to the lack of intercourse between yin and yang. And it says there are 3 cures. Number 1, to have intercourse with men, and day and night, no rest for 7 days. And number 2 is to burn mineral and to smoke the vagina. And number 3, to take some other medicine. Now, pay attention that for the treatment number 1, It gives specific instructions on how to conduct the intercourse treatment instead of simply assuming that sex with men or marriage consummation would solve the problem. In this book called Treatise on Ingesting Minerals, intercourse with ghosts is one of the many illnesses that a mysterious panacea called 锦衣花神丹 can cure. It describes that dreaming of intercourse with ghosts and deities can happen to men, women, monks, nuns, widows, and maidens. And it feels so real, as if it is with real human beings. Those who catch this, at first they would feel too embarrassed to say, and later they would simply hide it altogether. And they would love the ghost so much, so they wouldn't turn away until they die. Now, this text doesn't really elaborate on the cause of intercourse with ghosts, but the list of possible victims gives us a clue that in addition to men and women in general, it singles out monks, nuns, widows, and maidens. However, in the prescriptional medical tradition, before the song, intercourse with ghosts was not associated with one's sexual status. In this 7th century medical book titled On the Origins and Symptoms of All Illnesses, 诸病源候论, intercourse with ghosts, it appears first in a non-gender specific category of symptoms of ghost enchantment, and again in the chapter specifically on women's illnesses, these symptoms of women's various illnesses. So in this book, intercourse with ghosts is a result of bodily depletion, of irregular ingestion, or you can call lack of nutrition and rest, perhaps. And then demonic forces take the chance to intrude. It is not associated with the patient's sexual status. And the logic is that women are generally weaker than men, so then they are more susceptible to this. This pathology is basically inherited by most medical books, including this list of several books. They basically, when talking about intercourse with ghosts, they copy and paste this passage from On the Origins. Although one of them, Qi Zhongfu's 100 Questions on Women's Medicine, it also copy and paste the passage from On the Origins, but he has a very strange paragraph that basically puts together this etiology that explains this problem from lack of nutrition and rest from On the Origins, and then this other tradition that associate this problem with women's heterosexual inactivity, which is what we see from the bedchamber tradition. Now, this is the passage from 100 Questions on Women's Medicine. The author answers question number 47, what are the causes of intercourse with ghosts at night? And the first half is actually, the first half is really just a paraphrase from On the Origins. But then he continues after this passage. He says, it is said that some court ladies, nuns, and widows nowadays had dreamed of intercourse with ghosts, absorbed demonic qi, which eventually developed into tumors, and some even had ghostly fetuses. There are many such cases. Do you see a strange logic over here? Why court ladies, nuns, and widows are more susceptible to illnesses caused by lack of nutrition and rest? No, we can, of course, kind of try to explain for him that in Chinese medicine, the psyche is not really separate from the soma, and women are weaker also in controlling their emotions, and emotions including longings and desire, etc., etc. But then, but these are, the author didn't say this, right? And it's also possible that he might have taken these two parts from different places and just put them together. my point is, some medical writings are like this. They are heterogeneous. The best way to make sense of them is perhaps not to take them as necessarily anchored to a systematic, coherent ontology. The kind of conscious attempt to construct a new ontological pathology, as we have seen in Chen Ziming's paragraph on Guafu, was rare. And even Chen Ziming, as you can see, he is also among others who simply copy and paste on the origins, on the illnesses of intercourse with ghosts. Now, another thing that's interesting here is the ghostly fetuses. Ghostly fetuses, they're seen as a result of intercourse with ghosts. Well, it is basically, I would say, a kind of medical explanation of women's unexplainable swollen tummies. There were a lot of theories and cases surrounding ghost fetuses, especially during later times. Scholars have studied them in detail, but I just want to add my opinion to one thing that seems trivial, but I think is actually quite significant. Li Wu observes that in later medical case records, intercourse with ghosts is often seen as the cause of ghostly fetuses. But then ghost fetuses were seldom treated as the necessary result of intercourse with ghosts. So this etiological asymmetry. Li Wu's explanation is an etiological explanation that it's a little complicated, but it's ghost dreams are about the qi, something abstract, and ghost fetuses is about the essence, the gene, something concrete. So then they have different results, which is absolutely possible. But I just want to offer another possible explanation which is more simple. That because it is a lot easier really for a doctor to claim that his female patient has intercourse with ghosts than to say that she has ghost fetuses. Is that rather straightforward? To say a woman has ghost fetus, you have to have her have a swollen tummy, right? But then to say a woman has intercourse with ghosts, you just have to be really confident by saying so. And if a woman denies, they no, I don't have such crazy dreams, and the doctors can just say, because they are too embarrassed to admit, we have seen that before. And this is also something that we will continue seeing them in later medical cases. My point is, we have to really take seriously the possible tension between doctors and their female patients that's betrayed in their case record. Case records, of course, are not pure facts, but they are not always tied to a very coherent medical theory either. Case records reveal to us how doctors painstakingly try to deal with the impossibility of anyone other than the woman herself to know exactly how she feels, what she has dreamed, what she has not dreamed, her mystical experience. This, of course, would apply to male and female patients, but we do see extra effort to penetrate women's bodies and sexualities and their experiences. Those efforts are often incongruous with each other and inconsistent in themselves. And this is also where I find a methodological connection between reading medical cases of female patients and writings about religious women, which I deal with in another chapter of the book manuscript that I'm working on now. So now, just a quick summary again. We have seen at least two kinds of explanations to women's intercourse with ghosts. One is concerned their heterosexual inactivity and or sexual frustration. The other stresses irregular ingestions and bodily depletion. We can see demons are both there. Medical books, in a broader sense, deal with the patient's body. Exorcists and ritual masters will deal with the demons. So they are not necessarily two distinct systems. But some religious ritual specialists would claim that only their exorcism will work, and only with them in presence can conduct the exorcism. And they have a different etiology, that the cause of intercourse with ghosts is the so-called 3 death bringers and 9 worms, 39虫. So this book, Dark Book of the Divine Thearch, 子承玄书, it's a very strange title. Well, all Taoist books have strange titles. It is a ritual book of the Thunder Rise Taoism, or Lei Fa. It was written in the mid-14th century, but its content reflects the Thunder Rise that developed and was popular during the Song. According to it, the 3 death bringers and 9 worms are the source of the most serious plague, Lao Zhai. And dreaming of intercourse with ghosts is one of the many symptoms caused by this plague. And it says this kind of disease, it cannot be cured by any medicine, by any medical or shamanistic healers in the world. So you have to have, so medicine doesn't work, shamans out of this tradition doesn't work. You have to have the professional knowledge and ordained position in order to perform effective rituals. Just having the talisman is useless. Now I will show you, these are the 3 death bringers up there and the 9 worms. And this is the talisman that I use for treating intercourse with ghosts. But for your information, if you just get it from somewhere else, you are not a ritual specialist in this tradition, it doesn't work. You have to pay, I don't know, and hire them to come over to your house and to perform. So this tradition, it also doesn't associate intercourse with ghosts with sexual status, but it insists that its ritual specialists physically intervene this process. Now we can add more to the list that diverge even further from the first 2 paradigms. Some are just about the demons or the deities and not so much about the patient, and some are just about the patient and completely excludes the demonic factor. We will look at 3 more sources. One is, do we still have time? Yes, we have a little bit of time. So one is an anecdotal collection called Record of a Listener, Yi Jianzhi from the 12th century. And second is a Dr. Hsiao-wen from the 14th century, his case record. And then the third is another doctor from 16th century's book called Orthodox Transmission of Medicine. Oh, yeah, and this is a criticism directly of Hsiao-wen's case record. Now, this Yi Jianzhi, or Record of Listener, is a big collection. It has more than 30 volumes, and it was written and published one after one for more than 20 years until the author died. The author reiterates that there were no fiction. All the stories are what he heard from his contemporaries. We have a lot of scholars working on this collection. Some scholars take it as the author's assertion of the faithfulness or factualness of his record. My opinion is different. My opinion is that the author never guaranteed the factualness of his record. He actually admitted that his writings was awkward and his records often contradictory. What he insisted instead was that they were faithful record of exactly what he heard from his contemporaries. Now the first story I want to show you in this collection is a story it's a love story. Well, it's not really a love story, but it's something happened between a local official's daughter and her Mr. Canonaut. So it says one day this young woman, he climbed up a 2-story building in their courtyard, and suddenly she started to talk and smile to an old Canonaut tree outside of the window. And also from that day, she started to wear makeup and climb up the building every single day. Her father, of course, found that quite suspicious and problematic. So the father called shaman and found medicine to treat her, 护无仿药治之, but none worked. Now the father got really pissed, so he basically just cut down the tree by himself, and it worked. So, when the tree was cut, the girl cried and called out, "Oh, my Mr. Candlenut!" And the story says, once the tree was cut down, the girl recovered and remembered nothing. Okay, and the second story is to say that this kind of exorcism, or any kind of exorcism, doesn't really always make women happy and healthy. So this story tells about a local clerk's daughter and the son of this high Taoist god called Celestial King of the North, 北阴天王. So this son of this deity, basically, he actually lived with the woman for so long that was almost treated as a family member by the woman's family, and they seemed doing fine. And then until people gossip, and the father couldn't stand the gossip, so he started to look for some cures. And he called some religious masters, all were defeated, and he tried to find a fiancé, but the fiancé was scared away. And eventually a super powerful Taoist master came, and the deity was finally sent away. And in the end, the story says the girl stayed home. No one dared to propose a marriage to her. After her parents died, she made her living by selling wine on her own. When thinking of the happiness that she had shared with the young man, she always shed tears. The story is told in such a way as if the narrator also thinks it's such a bad idea to chase the deity away. Why you bother to listen to people's gossip? The two previous stories are all about maidens, right? A kind of 寡妇 in Chen Ziming's definition. Although none of the narratives actually makes explicit association with the girl's sexual status. The third story, interestingly, is about a woman who is by default super sexually active. It is about a prostitute or a courtesan and her deity lover. So it says that the woman one day visited a temple, and before even entering the temple, she saw a statue of a horseman outside of the temple, which is supposed to be the guardian of that temple. And she loved that so much, and she fell in love. She was gazing at the statue for a whole day, didn't even bother to enter the temple. And that night, this horseman deity assumed human form and visited her. They two quickly developed a romantic relationship until one day the deity was, finally confessed to her that, I was in fact the statue that you've seen outside the temple gate, but now I have to leave because I visited you too much, and I keep skipping my night duties, and now I was called by my superior, so they sent me away. The woman cried and prepared offerings to see him off. Now in this story, no medicine or exorcism is applied. And it is also not understood as either a medical problem or a spirit possession. Another thing that's interesting is that the woman in the story is the subject rather than the object of the desire. Everything starts with her intense look at the statue, and the narrative even says, she saw the draperies over the statue's thighs seem fluttering in the air, etc. Well, some may think that it is possibly a kind of male fantasy, projecting toward, a male fantasy toward such women, how they desire men, how they look at men. But if that's the case, this would be a very strange story either, because there's no description at all of the woman's physical trait. And throughout the story, there's no character that a real man, especially a literatus, can identify himself with. So it is possible, I would propose, that this story might have been originally circulated among the prostitutes or the courtesan circle as a lament for their transitory love affairs, and it got written down by the author who other literati of his time frequently hung out with courtesans, and he in particular was so obsessed with recording stories as exactly how they were told. Now, this medical case of our second source, medical case of Hsiao, the 14th century doctor, in this case, he says he treated a girl who had a very similar experience with the second story that we've seen. This girl dreamed of intercourse with the deity after looking at this image in a temple. And then she had ghost fetus. But then the only thing this doctor Hsiao did was to give her a medicine for abortion. And the girl, well, and in the end it says the girl discharged a whole bucket of something like tadpoles and fish eyes and then recovered. So this case record was furiously criticized by the 16th century doctor Yu Tuan. He said, Yu Tuan said, intercourse with ghosts happen only in men and women who are wanton and weak and depleted. These so-called ghost fetuses are not real fetuses conceived by intercourse with ghosts and demons. They are simply the accumulation of secretions generated by endless thoughts and unfulfilled desires. And Yu Tuan keeps saying that Hsiao's case was true, but then the cause was misidentified. It was not because of the demon. Yu Tuan said, how can images made of clay and wood have intercourse with people and have semen to conceive a fetus? It was not that the god enchanted the girl, but the girl let herself be enchanted by the god. And Yu Tuan said, I speculate that it was because the girl didn't have a husband and had endless thought and unfulfilled desires. He said, men of sense, don't listen to that kind of heresy. Here, up to 16th century Yu Tuan, having the problem of intercourse with ghosts or ghost fetuses is completely the woman's own fault. It is not because, it is not because of the ghost, it's because those people are wanton. Now, we'll come back to my outline. Chen Ziming's pathology of guafu and many of these different imaginations of women's sexuality were not intended to reinforce the marriage system or Confucian family ethics. They were rather conditioned by the family system, especially the medical prescriptions. However, many of them, perhaps unintentionally, could pose a threat to the family system by either providing a physiology against widow chastity or a convenient excuse to have an abortion, for instance. Yu Tuan's criticism of Hsiao was perhaps a response to such crisis. But medicine was only one kind of voice, one among many ways for women to understand what happened to them and what they experienced. Not to mention, the medical tradition was extremely heterogeneous. Heterogeneity and inconsistency is how power really works. Juxtaposing and comparing different kinds of sources complicates the picture. Being critical of heteronormative assumptions helps revealing the nuances of the sources. So what I have been trying to do is to present, as complicated as possible, a picture of the entanglement of gender, sexuality, and the body, how female sexuality had been perceived in multiple different ways, and how those ways have been changing. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for a really interesting presentation. I know it's after 2 and some people may have to go to class, but so feel free to take off if you need to, but we hope many of you will be able to stay for a discussion. And are you ready to take some questions and comments on the presentation? And we have a microphone to pass around for anybody who has a question. Yeah, there's Ilka.
Thank you, Hsiao-wen, for the very interesting presentation, and I learned a lot. I'm always curious when I'm listening to these kind of analyses. You talked about women, but you also mentioned that the possibility these doctors described that men also could be possessed. Did they talk about that, and what kind of prescriptions did they mention for men in these cases, and could you make some comparisons for men and women in the works you analyze here? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Actually, we have several scholars in the field. They've made a wonderful comparison, actually, especially in literature works. They compare, because we have a lot of this kind of romance between men encountering a beautiful, enchanting female ghost when they are studied so hard, and then suddenly a beautiful woman came in, and then so scholars like Judith Zeitlin, Rainier Huntington, they made this comparison in cases that we've seen, especially in literature works, that those encounters between men and female ghosts, they usually happen as a romantic encounter, and then the issue is rather moral. You shouldn't let yourself be enchanted, etc., etc. And then the focus in that kind of story is also not about the sexuality of those female ghosts. It's rather about how men kind of keep their bodies and emotions in control. And those ghosts, those female ghosts, were not because they sexually desire men, because they kind of want men's energy to kind of to revive into human beings or whatever. And whereas cases on women's intercourse with ghosts, they are usually, especially in later period times, they're presented as some kind of either spiritual possession, that as we see some of the cases here, the woman would be conscienceless, they're possessed, and after this everything is taken care of, they remember nothing, or it's treated as a medical problem. So is there this case comparison? But what's interesting is that from the time period that I'm working on, around 12th, 13th century, especially in the the case comparison that I said earlier are in these literary fiction, those fictional works written by elite men. And then those anecdotes that I'm working on, they have a quite a messed up picture. So if you really want to look at some patterns, you really don't see any patterns. We do see some cases that fit into those categories, but we also see prostitutes and and the horseman. She's not out of conscience, right? And she's not treated as a medical case. She's not possessed, and she is not morally, So the interesting thing about anecdotes or popular anecdotes from the song is that they're really diverse the cases, and yeah. Am I answering your question? Kind of, yes.
Huh. Would the ghost fetus be? No, you need a recording.
Do you think the ghost fetus is the medieval Oriental equivalent of what we now consider to be the hysterical pregnancy?
Yeah, of course, that can be one of the possibility, and it can be many things. It's just like in medieval Europe, when people call people leopard, it can be a lot of things. It can be, I don't know, a lot of acne, or it can be a lot of things, and they would categorize them all into the same category. And so as I said, a lot of scholars also work on that, and they would have interesting discussion and see how in this kind of time period when we have a lot of medical ambiguity and how people treat women's bodies, etc. But my interest is basically to see how how in this case record we not only see male doctors in control, we also see how they out of control, how they how they are capable of writing what they want to write, but how they are incapable of treating, of understanding, putting things into their world that's betrayed in their writings. Yes. Okay, we have a long way to travel.
This may be too far afield and not close enough to the topics that you discussed, but in listening to you, and especially this constant refrain of unsatisfied or sexually frustrated women, I just wondered, what was the theorization of female satisfaction or female climax? And then I was curious about these various ways, or this ghost lover, ghost fetus, etc. How do you demarcate that from, what role did autoeroticism play in solving this problem of sexual frustration, and what about homosexual contact? Is this discussed by these same doctors, or was that considered were they considered to be non-medical issues, or normal things, as opposed to this consorting with demons?
Yeah, I think, what's your first question again?
Well, first of all, I wondered about satisfaction and climax.
Right.
It was theorized at all.
Right. Right. Interestingly, they don't really talk about that. And the references, if we have to say, they are the realm that women should not go. They are, when you really think about, when they talk about climax, when they talk about women super sexually fulfilled, that's when they're having sex with ghosts, right? That's when they say, right. That's when they say, oh, they feel so, they feel so good, and they will hide it. They don't let anybody know. And in those anecdotes, when it's also interesting when when these anecdotes that we see. Now we may consider those, girls and boys in their puberty, their expression of desire is kind of normal. But then to them, expression of desire in girls' puberty is considered demonic, or something that's problematic. So, it's a really interesting point. They don't really talk about it, especially in the medical tradition. And we do see a lot of that actually in the bedchamber tradition. And they will tell you exactly, that was so detailed of all the signs of women arousal. And those are to tell men that how to observe. Now stage number 1, women will sweat, and then you know what to do. And then stage number 2, and then now you know what to do. And that kind of thing you see in bedchamber works, and that part is completely excluded from medicine after the Sondheims. So yeah, that's really interesting. And also, in the bedchamber works, there's one part that also teaches how to reproduce, how to conceive sons, especially. But that also has nothing to do with climax or whatever. That's basic. That's more about the timing, the direction, and the frequency, etc. So, and then in relation to eroticism.
So I mean, in other words, the sex with ghosts was orgiastic sex. It was good sex. Is that the idea, or the sex with ghosts? It was organismic sex. It was orgasmic sex. It was.
Yeah. That's my modern explanation. But yeah, I would say that's one possibility, or but that's one kind of orgasm that women do without men, right? Right. Yeah. And then your second question about homosexuality, I do find one reference to that in terms of both male and female homosexuality in medical books. That's I think it's from a 5th century medical books. It talks about a kind of illness infection that's called yin-yang yi, yin-yang exchange. So this kind of infection describes a way that disease got passed on when during intercourse between men and women. So when a guy has certain kind of problem and he's not fully recovered yet, and he has sex with a woman, and then it can get passed on to a woman and vice versa. And it says that it doesn't happen between men and women. It doesn't happen between two men and two women. So then it doesn't really comment on that, but that says a kind of awareness that it's not just between men and women.
Can I ask next? I have two questions. I don't even know if they're relevant, but one is, this is all like a medical explanation. Is there any religious tradition connected with all of this, or is that just out there and separate?
No, it's not. It's not out
There's
there.
no-
It's completely, religious tradition is not separate from the medical tradition. Actually, I would say, and you can see that medical doctors, Ben chamber authors, the Taoist ritual masters, they are treating. Well, at least they think that they are treating the same problem, right? And they have different approaches to something that they perceive as the same problem, right? And we also see in medical books, also in some medical books, that in their long list of prescriptions, sometimes there are also Taoist talismans, there are feng shui charts, that kind of thing. So it's not a separate. They are not separate, but yeah, they are interrelated in a way, and they all have their distinct perspectives. Yeah.
And I have the second question was one in which I spoke with you the other day, and it's probably, and I don't know if it's part of anything you do, but is there any cross-cultural work that feeds into what you're doing, or is that too large a topic?
No, I don't think it's, well, I would hope that I can, for example, read Latin or, whatever, Old English, so that I can do some, but it is true that my study is a lot inspired by people who work on sexuality in medieval Europe. Mm-hmm. And I also see a lot of similar cases in Japanese folk tales that talk about this kind of possession, etc. So I do think there is a possibility. No, yeah, I'm sure it's everywhere. Yes.
Thank you so much. It was so enjoyable. Pass it around again. Oops.
Thank you very much for your talk, and it was particularly interesting for me because I work on Africa, especially Nigeria and Ghana, and I see that there are many similar things happening to women and to men as well, especially this dreaming of spirits. In Africa they call them spirits, and about the intercourse that can happen during the dreams. So I was hoping to know a little bit more, to have a more analytical approach on what does it really mean to dream of having sex with somebody.
You mean what actually happened?
No, well, I guess we can imagine what happened. I don't know. I'm trying to, because this will also help me to explain a little bit more even of my field. So I hope we can find a way to really understand what is the social and the spiritual meaning of dreaming about sex, right? Both for women and men. Why there is this realm of sexuality in an unreal world? I mean, do you think that it can be related to social control about sex? Do you think that there are so many cultures obsessed, because this is kind of obsession about sex in another realm? Is it about control? can we read all this dreaming about sex with a Foucaultian lens about, you know, control, sexuality? I don't know, I'm trying to see if we can make a cross-cultural analysis of what does it mean to dream about having sex in Africa and China.
Yeah. Okay, let me see if I can answer your question in so one footnote is that you see I put dreaming of in parentheses because it's not necessarily in dreams. You know, it is just, you know, for there's no clear cut between either you're dreaming it or you're actually having it. And a lot of spiritual experience were understood as dreaming or understood as some kind of, you know, spiritual journey, but they are not that distinguished from what we would call reality. And also people at that time, they also have, you know, they also know what dreams are. They're not stupid, you know, they know that people can dream of things that they think during the day. And so that's just regular dreams. So they have this idea that distinguish regular dreams from those really demonic dreams or those miraculous dreams, those dreams where the deity revealed to them. So there are these different layers in. So I think we have, you know, we have our distinction between what is dreaming and what is not, and what is, you know, your subconscious world and what is the reality. But I don't think that distinction really worked that well for them. So that's the first thing. And then speaking of Foucault, well, I would love to say that there, of course, power in control. There's, of course, power working in there, and there's, of course, control. And whenever somebody try to intervene, try to tell you what is happening, whenever somebody try to do something to it, try to describe what has happened, and add their explanation, interpretation to it, that is a way of control, right? That is a kind of power at work. But and speaking of Foucault, we know it's interesting that we know what Foucault talked about China, right? China in the West we have scientific sexuality. In China we only have erotic ars erotica, right? So of course I would love to say no, we have that too. You know, we have this power in control, but and that's what a lot of people studying gender in Chinese medicine was saying. You know, look at this. This power in discoursing women's bodies in Chinese medicine. But what I want to say is, well, yeah, that's true, but you know, they are this kind of conscious construction of a coherent framework to describe women's bodies and their sexuality was rare. And what we frequently see is a combination, a mixture of many things, and that I don't think the authors were very consciously making something new and making something discursive, making something systematic. And of course, that's discursive too, but we have to see the most complicated ways that, you know, discourse kind of or what was laid out in those medical books. And on the other hand, we also have people in China feel things that, yeah, that's kind of true. You know, we don't have compulsory heterosexuality in pre-modern China. We only have marriage imperative. As long as women are married, we don't care. We don't, you know, in pre-modern China, nobody cares about women's sexuality. I don't think that's true either, because look at medical texts. Right. Mm-hmm. Look at Batchenberg works. So what I'm trying to do is that, you know, I do take Foucault seriously, but we have to take Foucault seriously in the sense that any kind of discourse is not always systematic and self-coherent, and they can be a result of many heterogeneous things.
Thank you so much. I think this last question is really helpful in illustrating the importance of the work that you're doing and the importance of incorporating the study of China fully into sexuality studies. So we're very grateful, and please join me in thanking Hsiao-wen.